This is a session with Tanadet Tor Prawn 49, and it's a unique session for a number of reasons, one of which is that Tanadet is still an active fighter. He is very well constructed as a clinch and knee fighter, and going up and training with him in Chiang Mai, where he's from, I wanted to work only on this long clinch that he's very well known for, and he has perfected this kind of rare technique. And so it's also a unique episode in that we're working on just this one technique that he has really brought to another level, and he's brilliant at teaching it. So including fighters who are still active is something that I find very interesting for the library, and working only on this technique is incredible because nobody does it like Tanadet. There's a film study of this, of him using it in fights, that you'll be able to see
so learn
in the text of the session. But look at his legs. One of the things that Dieselnoy has insisted on me many times is that as a knee fighter, you have to have incredibly strong legs. When you watch Tanadet and you can see every muscle in his legs, you can see why that is. And I am not making the same shapes he is. Look at the curve in the top of my back. That's the shape I'm trying to make as I tuck my head under his chin. You pinch your shoulders together and make your arms long, which is why I call it the long clinch that goes behind the head. I'm asking him a point and he doesn't understand. I'm like, do you go forward or back? And he's like, either. You keep moving. But look at his feet. He's on his toes, and he makes like a if you were holding on a bar and you just put all your weight back to stretch your shoulders out, that's the shape he's making. He makes almost like a buckled V, whereas I'm curved. But look at him come under my chin, and he's putting his forearms on my neck. He's making a point about how if the opponent is tall, you make your arms longer rather than making your body higher. But look at his head under my chin. He's like in my jugular, but he's pushing up on my chin, which takes away any power I might have to be able to get out of this position.
He uses a 4 here. He uses this to...
So Kevin is pointing out that he makes a 4 out of his arms. We also call this the zip tie. So he basically keeps one arm straight, and the other one that folds over it, that's the one that's pinching the head of his opponent into his own head. The reason that's interesting is it's very much like a classic lock, where one arm creates a bar behind the neck, and then the other arm is the one that actually does the cranking and pulling. You don't use both arms equally when you create this position, but pinching the shoulders together is something that I really struggle with because I'm trying to muscle it, whereas Tanadet creates that tension by the angle of his body stretching him out, and it rolls his shoulders together in a more natural way, so he's not muscling it. He doesn't get tired.
So you do it long all the time. He zip ties, pulls,
Kevin is saying that I keep my arms long all the time, whereas Tanadet grabs long, and then he does that zip tie thing with his arms and can change kind of the tension within the position, but he doesn't actually move out of the position. That's why it's like a zip tie. It just slides up and down along the length of his arm. So see that curve in my back? That's keeping my hips from being in a position where I can use my legs to really move him. So because I can't use my legs to move him, I'm using my upper body, which should be a really locked in position, and I'm having to use my upper body to move him, which means that I'm using muscles doubly wrong. Look at the angle of his body. See how it comes from his head straight back to his hip, and then there's a secondary turn down to his legs.
He makes it like a lock, though. He lock. You don't lock. You just put your hands out. Like a lock. He locks it.
So I'm not using that arm that comes across to lock the neck of the opponent into position.
To lock it in. But it's a lock.
I basically don't have a grip in what I'm trying to do. Look at where his head falls between his arms. His arms go right to his
Tight
ears
against
on
your
either
head, yeah.
side. And then his shoulders are like rolled in. And then the reason you keep moving like this is so that the ref doesn't break it and to keep your opponent off balance. So as they're trying to get knees or angles to get you off, because you keep moving, everything they do is 1, ineffective, and 2, does not look good. I'm asking about entry. He's saying you use your arms and your shoulders like normal clinching first, and then when you see your opportunity to grab up into the long guard, or the long clinch, you just move in. But his arms move to either side of my neck, and his head goes under my chin, all as one movement. There's no like, this goes here and that goes there. It's all one thing. Look at how wide his stance is, and he's always on his toes. His legs are so strong.
My feet are getting like this.
I'm taking too many steps. Like, my feet are coming close together, and I'm like prancing with my feet. He takes very deliberate turns all the time. If you watch him, even when I'm pulling him, the width of his legs and how bowed they are, he's very balanced all the time. There's that hunch I'm doing, but look at the difference. Look at him. See how he pulls his hips back, but he doesn't have his ass back? And his knees are bent, and it looks like he's like holding on to something and letting his body drop back. Look at his arms go up by his ears, and he tucks his head between them.
But not like with your body. You still want to be.
When you look at him in the full
Back,
position,
always
there
back,
isn't a
mostly
break
back.
in lines. When I'm doing it, there's like I'm blowing out lines, like the curve of my back blows out a line, or my head pops up too high or down too low and it breaks that line. He's like a line drawing. He's very, very straight. So here, as he's trying to grab my body, I just pull farther back to get out of the way of him, but I'm still locked in. See? See how he just pulls his hips all the way back? But he's not losing his center of balance ever. Look how long. And there, I'm trying to turn him, but because his head is under my jaw, any amount of strength I try to do to move him is pretty ineffective. So I have to try to get
Cannot turn.
timing,
And your
or
legs
like
are wide.
when I can turn him with technique. But because he's so broad,
The biggest
I
difference
can't
is
even
his
really
hand
feel
is on
where
the back
he's
of the neck,
going.
squeezing in. You can't feel it, but your hands are loose. You keep your hands straight and loose.
This was really sweet. Tanadet saw somebody walking up the driveway that he used to know back in the day when he was still living up in Chiang Mai. He's been down in Sriracha at Tor Prawn 49 camp for the past, I don't know, 6 years or something. He's so excited to see him. So I'm starting to understand the like bend in the knees and being on the toes in order to like pull to different positions. But because I can't flatten my back out the way that he does, I'm not able to actually use that position of my legs. Look at the, my arms are straight here because I'm pulling back, but when we're in a more neutral position, my elbows are actually popped out a little bit. I did not realize this until much later when he literally shows it to me on the bag, and I'll point it out again, but he rolls his arms inward almost as though the backs of your hands are facing each other, and that locks the shoulders into place by keeping the forearms really pinched around the neck. But look at how relaxed both his arms are. The only one that's doing anything strength-wise is the one that bends around the back, and even then it's only doing enough power to like lock the opponent's head into place. See how my forearm is not touching the back of his head? That's why I can't lock. But my feet are being a little less prancy now. Like I'm starting to feel his like broad stance, continuous movements.
It's amazing because he can't move, but I can feel how that's not locked.
It's not locked, yeah.
He can't get
he
out
locks it.
from what I'm doing, but I'm not locked the way that he is, so I'm actually getting tired. And when I get tired, I try to change my position to like relieve the fatigue, and that's when he's able to get out. He does this in such a relaxed way. His shoulders are just locked in and he's not using strength. So he doesn't get tired. He doesn't have to change position to relieve any fatigue. He just can cling there all day.
Yeah.
But I think that the position that I'm making.
So I'm starting to understand this like hunchback thing that I'm doing is not
No,
quite
you just
right.
have to pull that
But I
arm,
haven't
crank
seen
that arm
myself,
down.
so I don't know what it is.
There's no reason to. You're keeping it straight.
It's like I think I'm doing what he's doing, but I haven't seen that it doesn't look like the same shape. But my head underneath his jaw is why I'm able to control him to the extent that I do, even though my technique is not quite right. So getting the head under the jaw is a huge part of making this work. So I'm asking about knees from this position, and you just do straight knees
It
from
looked
here.
a little
You don't
better, but
you don't need to do like curved knees or wide knees or anything because you've hollowed out the space between you and your opponent. A straight knee is open the entire time.
อันนี้เอาแบบเราไล่แขนก่อนนะครับแล้วหาจังหวะคีบผมให้ได้ครับ
So he's saying that you
ไล่แขน
both get into this position and find opportunity for this position through the rhythms, like feeling timing and rhythms from normal clinch. People are not going to let you grab, and you can't just like walk in and grab this position. You get there from very basic swimming, the kind of thing that you're going to feel in clinch all the time. Something that he showed me early and he likes to do is you control the arms first, like you get inside position on the arms first and kind of peel them down, and then you very naturally just shoot your arms up to the neck. It's like a bear trap. It like yawns the arms open. See how I have inside position? And then you can just snap up to the neck. He's showing how you can do arm loops to get that arm out of the way of your opponent before grabbing up in the neck as well. So I'm like, when you first come in, when you're first walking, you don't have to be long first. And he's like, no, it's just very normal. Like, this is the way everyone clinches, and then you grab for it. So you don't have to like zombie your arms forward first. Look at his legs. Like, even though he's not the one doing the long clinch, his legs are doing what he does in the
that
long
turn was
clinch,
good.
and that's why I can't move
Yeah,
him
right
as
turn
much.
is very beautiful.
He's so strong, and his base is so wide that you can't really turn him. He just has to follow you to stay upright.
ผู้หญิงละครเวลาปั๊มไม่เป็นแต่ว่าเน้นๆนี่
So I'm saying that a lot of fighters who don't have huge clinch technique, they'll just hold really tight. Like, they'll grab on and try to stay as close as possible to like snuff your clinch.
สอนมาเลยครับเราสอน
And so see how he's like locking my arms out? This is someone trying to grab close to like snuff the clinch. And he peels my arms down by getting double inside near my elbows, and he pulls my arms down to my side and then gets into this position. And see how he's not even using long clinch there. He's doing like a more basic lock. You can move between those two. So because I'm trying to clinch close and tight, my feet come together and he uses rhythm and timing to twist me. Like, when someone's feet come closer together, you turn them. That's why his legs are at such a broad base all the time.
ใช่ปั้มได้ที่แรกก็จะปั้มกันก่อนปั้มหาจังหวะปั๊บแล้ว
See how he hooked my arm for a second just to like pull it out of the way, and then he got into his position. It's almost like a parry, except he's not parrying the arm, he's just arm hooking it real quick and then popping into the position he wants.
ด้วยนะครับเวลาเขาจะดึงเราก็มองนะ
He doesn't clinch really close. He clinches long, and he says he can watch the legs.
And he
This is
he
the
pulls his
crazy
feet
thing.
very
He
wide.
never gets into a position where his body is close to his opponent. And because his head is all tucked under the chin, he says he watches the legs of the opponent to know where they're trying to go and what they're trying to do. When you're learning how to clinch, you
Can you
don't want
feel
to
that?
watch people's legs at all. You want to learn how to feel things. But
Yeah,
Karahat,
too close.
who's
Yeah,
one of the
why?
greatest fighters of all time, also told me that he watches the legs while clinching, which means that you can feel everything too, but when you get in a position where you have multiple senses, you can feel it and you can see, you have an advantage over someone who's kind of blindly trying to feel where you're going to, like, time something. Dieselnoy talks a lot about how you have to keep moving. When you grab someone, you have to keep changing your position, one, to keep them off balance, but two, to keep the ref from breaking you. And that's what Tanadet does. Because he's in a locked position. If you just lock and stay there, you're going to be broken. But if you lock and move, you're very active.
เขาจะดิ้นเพื่อจะออก
So see how he's trying to change position from, I had like kind of a static position that he let me keep for a second, but an opponent's not going to do that. So he starts to move, and I have to find my way into the long clinch position, but I didn't force his arms down first. Like, one of the ways that you change position in clinch without getting in trouble for it is to distract your opponent first. So if I need to move my upper body's position, you distract them by kneeing down low or trying to trip down low or something. And likewise, if you're actually trying to trip them, you do something up top, because then they're distracted up top and you can do something they're not thinking about down low. So this is one of the reasons that he manipulates the arms first, is that you're like, we're struggling with arms. And so you're focused on whatever he's moving. And then he can pop into his position very fast because you're thinking about something else.
You're trying in shadow a little bit, like he does.
So here I'm trying to get his footwork and his broad base from that position. Basically like shadow the long clinch. And I feel it a little bit, like I'm not busy with my feet as much. He doesn't knee all the time, like he's not constantly scoring, but he's moving all the time in order to create the openings for a really nice, strong, straight knee to score.
มันจะไม่มันจะไม่
So there I kind of like wiggled my way into the position rather than popping into it like the bear trap, which he does. So he's kind of trying to take his hips closer to mine in order to take away that space where I can score straight. But he can't even stand up straight because of the way that I'm pulling backwards. That's part of the long clinch and why you pull and push. Is you're forcing your opponent out of positions, body positions that they need to defend themselves or to attack you. Oh, when he puts his arms straight up, I just cannot
When he's tall,
do that
and I try to come
yet.
up, I have a hard time
I have to see it,
because I get
and I
really
couldn't
narrow.
see what I was doing.
ถ้า
So I'm like, if your opponent is really tall, do your feet come together? Because you have to try to be tall too. And the answer is not really, because you become taller with your arms. Like your arms go up rather than your whole body.
มันจะอึดอัดครับเวลาโดนล็อกเวลาคนโดนล็อกมันจะอึดอัดอึดอัดแบบเวลาผมล็อกเนี่ยมันก็จะอึดอัดนะครับ
So he's in this position. Look at his whole shape. And see how he can kind of even hop his legs back. Like he's not even stepping.
กดเข้าคอน
So he's using this word got. Got means to like embrace, but it also means to pull down. So he's making this point about putting your head underneath someone's chin, but then the position of your arms is like dragging them down.
ทีนี้กดนี่จะหันข้างนะครับ
And so I'm pushing into his head, and the pain of that is causing him to distort himself. He's the one who's leaning to the left. And when I feel him starting to do that, that's when I can twist him as he's trying to wriggle out.
So you steer them with your head, and because there's pain, they start to go this way or they start to go that way,
Okay.
and then you knee.
อันนี้ก็ขาไล่แขนนะครับสอดผมให้ได้นะครับอีอ๋อ
He's saying you have to use your shoulders and your arms and this swimming thing on your way in, otherwise they're just going to elbow you as you try to grab. So here, right there, I was struggling against him trying to wrap his arms around me. And so I was the one who was distracted, and then I had to work my way into this position. Instead, I should have had a moment that made him tense or panic before I popped into it. It's a small detail. It's not something that's important when you first start trying it. But as you play with it and working into this position from clinch positions that are more familiar and you'll find yourself in very frequently, finding your way into it is a huge part of it. So his head is like connected to my jaw and pushing into my jugular at every second. No matter where I move, no matter where he's pulling me, it's the same contact. Whereas when I move, my head kind of like pops off of him a little bit.
Your arms long is you pinch your shoulders.
It's one of the reasons I get tired.
Yes, but you feel that if you pull this out, you're not pinching your shoulders. He pinches them and pulls it in. Yeah.
There, I kind of get the position he does with my arms up by my ears.
Relaxes that shoulder for you, but he doesn't. He pinches.
But the head drops down to be like straight between the arms. It's like completely level. Look at that.
Look how small that entry is. Yeah.
He actually, when you feel it, he does not have his arms perfectly in the same position as each other. One of them is a little bit more lax than the other. It's like not quite as tight against the neck. But then as you try to swim in, you're like, you think you have a space and you try to take advantage of it. He just straightens that arm a little bit harder. It's the same as how you use your shoulder to block someone being able to grip your neck. And that necessarily opens up your other side. But when they try to go to the other side, you just pinch that side closed too. So there's a slight seesaw to the tension in his arms, but it's very, very small. Oh, his head and arm position is just insane. But you have to look at the overall shape of the straight back down to his hip, and then the bend in his knees. He's talking about trips and turns here. So there, you just kind of feel the opponent's movements because they're trying to follow you to stay upright. And so you feel when their feet kind of come together, or you feel when they start to lean in a direction, and that's when you whip to turn them down. I was pretty surprised by how much I was moving him because I really wasn't using a lot of power or strength. It's because when I was thinking to turn him and starting to feel that rhythm for the turn, I think that the tension in my shoulders and my arms became closer to what he's doing the whole time when I was thinking of turning him. So there I'm starting to keep my head in position before getting my arms in.
Oh, nicely done.
You feel where the opponent's going and you follow.
Really?
So it's kind of like on a motorbike, if you're taking a really sharp turn, you kind of like lean into the turn a little bit. It's like that with your opponent. You feel them starting to lean to one side, and then you just help them along by twisting in that same direction. He's talking about how you have to keep moving to keep the referee from breaking you. So he's saying lock really tight. And then he's like, use jangwa is rhythm and timing. So even if someone else has locked you, you feel where their weight is, and that's when you do your turn. And he's saying it's the same pattern when you're in the long clinch, even if you're on the inside instead of the outside. It's pretty good. You'll feel it. It's pretty natural to what most turns in the clinch feel like anyway. But learning how to put tension in the right spots and relaxation in the right spots from this position is what's a huge difference between his level and my following along with what he's trying to show me. But that's true of all clinching, is starting to feel things and not being tense everywhere, but only tense where you need it. The way he keeps his hips back is amazing. A lot of clinchers don't stay in that position all the time because it can be dangerous. But the way he does it, it's like he's perfected this angle, and things that would be a weakness in a lot of clinch exchanges are an advantage for him almost all the time.
อ๋อนั่นนะครับ
So there I'm starting to get that 4 position that Kevin was talking about. And I have tension only in one arm, but I lose it as I try to turn him rather than having my forearms kind of pinched in so that as I turn, the position itself puts pressure on him. Instead, I have to create the pressure by like moving my arms.
นี่ไม่ค่อยเปิดค่ะ
So telling when he just puts himself in the position. He does not change from that overall silhouette ever.
ท่าเดิมนะครับท่าแบบขี้ไปเลยครับ
And then he's pulling with his footwork.
แล้วลากไปทำร้อย
It's almost like tug of war. Like if you look at when people are in the heat of tug of war and they're really pulling on the rope, they make this same position that he's making. It's all in the leg and like leaning back with the hip.
You cannot get in
Mm.
doing this.
If you keep moving. Yeah.
He's able to use his full body weight to pull. So I'm asking him about other locks. Like, does he ever transition between the long clinch and kind of more traditional locks? And here's where it shows that the lock that a lot of people use with the bar across the back of the neck and then the arm on the front of the shoulder rather than long, is pretty much the same concept of only using power in one of those arms. And you can move between the long clinch and this one really easily.
Are his hands all the way by his head?
By his head.
But
Yeah,
the
his head
similarity
is
between the two of what
locked
makes
in on
it
the same side.
inescapable is the way he uses his head as a third part.
เราเอาซุกเข้าไปนิดนึงครับเนี่ย
He puts his head where the
See
lock
how
is,
he's totally behind
And
his
the-
shoulder there?
and the lock is touching his head, the top of his head.
So he puts his head
It's a little bit
and
like
the
big
lock on the same
lock.
side, which just like crushes your jaw into his head.
ช่วยเอาหัวซุกเข้าไปยัดช่วย
ขอ
But his body shape and the way his hips are back and he's using his legs is the same as the long clinch. I'm a little bit more familiar with this one, so I was comfortable getting into it. But when I'm in this position, I do not move as much as he does. So again, it's I can be static in the position, but when you need to move in the position too, that's what shows you whether your lock is true or not. If it's a true lock, you can move as much as you want and it stays exactly the same, like an alligator's jaws don't move. Whereas when I try to move with this locked position, tiny changes are occurring in the position around his head and it creates little openings for him to get out because the contact points are shifting. Like my head comes off of him a little bit, or the arm makes too much space at times. So the difference between a true lock and a like only in a static position lock is whether or not it stays super tight while you're moving. But see how that moved between the lock that he just showed me and it became the long clinch for a second. He says you used rhythm. He started from the lock that he just showed me and then his arms twisted and went long and suddenly he was in the long clinch. But the change that I was talking about before of the elbows pointed out versus the elbows rolling in, where like the backs of your hands are facing each other, that's how you transition between the close lock and the long
ถ้า
lock.
คือเราสู้ลงจากแอลมีโอกาส
ใช่ครับแล้วก็
So as you're pulling back, as the opponent is trying to grab your waist, it creates a really good opportunity for you to knee straight. Knee them while they're trying to tackle you, and they basically like come into it.
ลงเอี่ยวครับ
So my feet come together at times because I bring them together in order to turn, which he does not do. But they're staying wider better, closer to what he's doing. But again, I'm still not using my legs as the power for driving all of that movement. He only uses his legs.
Yeah, when you
his
relax,
upper body
you
is
put your head out,
completely
you put it
locked in.
Yep. Stay under the water.
ถ้ามาจับว่าคู่ต่อสู้มานี่แล้วไม่ได้
So a lot of times when I'm clinching, if my opponents are
ไล่แขนอาร์
pretty aware of the clinch, they can lock out my arm pretty easily. So I'm like, what happens if your opponent is locking out your arm and you're trying to get this position? Because you have to get it from a pretty close to double inside position anyway.
ถ้าใครบางคนที่ยืดขึ้นไปแล้วก็
And so
ใช้ขาช่วยปัด
he's talking about standing. See how both of us are coming up higher? Like our bodies have kind of popped up
เวลาเขาจะยืดตัว
to kind of get top position.
So when you go tall and their feet come
Their
together
feet come together when
Oh.
they do that. And the moment their weight comes up, that's when you twist. I pulled his arm a little bit there, which is why he whipped so hard.
เราเอาให้เกี่ยวก่อน
แล้วก็เอ็นตรงความตลอด
So I'm trying to stay wide as much as possible and force his feet together by the like arms race to who's going to be on top as you're like clamoring to be over each other in the clinch leading into this. So as you're trying to fight for arm space and inside position, you can force someone's feet together by like bringing the whole thing up high to make them try to be taller. I'm rushing my knees in this position a little bit. Like my pullback is good, and then there should be a beat between pulling back and stopping and then throwing the knee.
Yeah.
I'm trying to throw the knee while
Put
I'm
your head
still
further
pulling,
in,
and it
lower.
takes power out of it. So that was good, grabbing his neck while he was trying to grab around my waist. And here I'm kind of turning my arms towards each other almost instinctually in order to lock my shoulders in, even though I didn't really understand how to do that yet. I'm asking how you make your shoulders strong enough for this, because my shoulders are burning. And what's interesting is he's not like pull-ups and push-ups, which is what you would think for making your arms strong, because doing this itself makes your arms strong. He's saying something that Yodkun Pan talks about, which is stretching your shoulders out afterwards. And so he was showing how to like roll your shoulders and do that chicken wing thing to kind of relax your shoulders. So rather than how do you make your shoulders strong enough for this, which they will become strong simply by doing it, the advantage is how do you keep your shoulders loose enough for this? Because they should actually relax at points within this movement. There we go.
Can you feel that?
Yeah, it's not being tense, but being tight in the shoulders.
So the difference between tension and tight that I'm talking about there is using muscular strength to hold my shoulders together versus locking into a position that you can kind of relax in. It's like if you are holding onto a bar, like a monkey bar, and just dangling your body. You have tension in your hands to hold onto the bar, but the rest of your body is pretty lax. That's putting tension in the right spot, but being relaxed otherwise. That's what I'm talking about when I say put tension in the right spot.
ถ้าจับคู่ต่อสู้
Oh, look at him go.
ว่าจะไปมั่ว
And he pulls in these little bursts
keeping
that totally makes
Way
the
back,
opponent look
yeah.
like they're just going to fall over. Like they're utterly controlled by the movement that he's doing. So because we're just working on the same technique over and over again, like how to get into it and how to pull around in it, getting into that position is where the nuance comes in. So as we're coming into clinch, me body punching or controlling his arms or any of those things, those are the small, what is natural to getting into this position that you can change up. But just getting into it is the part that's hard, is staying in it is the hard part. I'm starting to get my head lower, but see how it's not connected to his jaw or his neck? So I'm not putting as much pressure on him, and he can have more strength, natural strength, from me not putting that pressure on his jaw, which is why I want to keep it there all the time. I can feel that I'm rushing. When he moves, there's no meaningless movement ever. Like his feet never take extra steps.
ทำอะไรแรกทำเท้าแรก
I'm asking, what do you do first when you get into the position? Do you turn first or do you knee first? And he's like, yeah. Which means either one, depending on what position you're in when you get there. If the
Lock
knee
your
is
wrist,
opening,
baby.
take
Lock
it.
your wrist.
If the knee isn't open yet, you turn first. But
Lock your
you
wrist.
go between the two all the
Yeah.
time. You keep moving and kneeing so that the ref
Yeah.
won't break you.
Lock. See, he's a
Oh,
lock.
look at his pull.
When he
Did you
does
see
it, it's
that
a
little
lock. When you do it,
position he
you're just
took
putting
and he
your
was
arms out.
pulling back with his legs?
ไม่ใช่นี่
ถ้า
นี่
ขี้ถ้าขี้ไกลๆขี้เนี่ยมันสอดได้นะครับถ้าขี้ไกลๆ
He's like, if you don't keep your head close, the opponent can get under and push it out of the way.
เอา
Hold this tight.
But if I keep my head tucked into his jaw,
Pull that tight. So
there's nothing he can do. He can get positions with his hands where he could push my face out of the way or pop my head up, but because I'm putting so much pressure on his jaw, he doesn't literally have the physical strength to do it.
ไม่ทำอะไรแต่ว่านี่
When you mess with someone's line of their head and back, you take a lot of their strength away.
นี่ใช่ไหม
ใช่ครับรู้สึกแบบปวดเอาหัวช่วยด้วยนะครับ
ใช่
เอาหัวปวดลงมา
ใช่
ปวดลงมา
แคนดี้ไม่ทำอะไรนี่
ใช่ครับตั้งไว้เฉยเอาสองแขนข้างนี้แล้วก็หัวแขนนี้ก็ตั้งไว้เฉยแขนนี้ก็กดลงมา
ใช่
ครับกดลง
So
มา
he's saying gotlong. Gotlong is to pull down. Oh, that right there.
Oh, the bend.
It's beautiful. You can see how powerful it is, but when you feel that, he's like kind of hopping backwards and taking these steps to kind of drag you backwards in a very relaxed way. But then he does the downward pull, and it's like just a warning shot that there is no fucking way that you're getting out of that
There's
position.
no arm
Ever.
crank at all. You're not connected. It's dead for you.
on this one
Either one.
yeah
There's no arm crank.
I was asking him where do you feel it because when you do this lock it's here
Yeah.
but when you do this one it's there but I can't
Just feel
So
it in your hand.
I'm
Let your
understanding
hand
that you only
touch
use
your
one arm
Slide down your arm.
at a time to really use strength to lock the
my
position.
shoulders aren't tight enough
That's what I'm saying. You feel
But
like
I'm
they
not
go out.
rolling my arms in
You
to
gotta go
create the
backwards
tension in the shoulders
to
where they
tighten
can
them.
then relax in that position. But despite the errors in my form,
That was
if you can
better.
get the head locked in and keep it
too wide
on the jaw
Yeah.
like that, you can get away with a lot of
when
wiggle
you pull
room
back, when it
of
closes
not
in.
being
Yeah,
correct in
yeah.
the technique.
I think that's it.
Not when you're at the level that Tanadet was fighting at.
No, not yet.
He's
we
going
have
against incredibly
go.
good clinch fighters as well, and he wins in these exchanges because when those pieces work together, you cannot get out of this position, and he can stay in it forever.
ไล่เร็วๆ
It's beautiful because this long clinch position, you don't see it a lot, and actually it seems as though it's more common among northern fighters, which Tanadet started in the north and then was sold down to Sriracha's area, which is the central eastern part. But a lot of people who do use this position, they use it temporarily. They use it as like a transitional position to another position. He took something that people use temporarily and turned it into something that he can stay in and you cannot get out of.
ใช่ผมแล้วก็เหลืออีกข้างนึงแล้วก็ตั้งไว้ครับข้างนี้ก็ไล่เนี่ย
So he's trying to get me to control his arms more when I'm in those not longer positions, but with greater distance between us. So before I've gotten my head in, he really wants me to use my shoulders and my arms. And then once you get into the position where my head is locked under his jaw, nothing in my upper body moves. It's just the lower body.
and then I can't lock
Okay.
you have to get the lock first
Okay. Well, keep working with it so you can feel it. It's a feeling, baby. Just work with feeling.
The brilliant thing about being able to work on a single technique like this for this long is that you realize how much of it is feeling. Like, it works okay from like, do this and this, and you can do those two positions. But then when people start fighting against it and they start trying to find the weaknesses in it, and you try to do it under fatigue and all of these different things, you feel all the little nuances that as you adjust to them, turn something from that was a good move into a complete art form advantage. The way that Tanadet has perfected this technique requires like 20 hours of this plus to like feel out all those little differences. So there I'm doing fewer steps than I was 20 minutes ago when I first started this.
Don't put your butt
I'm
back,
understanding
put
not to
everything
like
back.
do lots of little
Not your
steps,
butt,
but to
though.
do big steps
His
for
feet
the
are always
turns.
under him. See, his feet are under his butt. But when you start pulling, you put your butt back and you pull like that.
Because I'm not bending my knees enough, that's why my butt goes back farther than it needs to. Look at his racer foot on his back foot. And so he can broaden his stance and actually hop both feet back at the same level, or he can take a step.
Deep step back.
But
that's good.
the bend in his knees, and if you watch his legs and how the muscles all come out, you can see how much leg strength is required for him to use his lower body as the entire powerhouse, because his upper body is locked. There I'm starting to a little bit, like you can see when my hips come back that I'm using a lot of my lower body, but because my back doesn't stay in the same position, I'm kind of borrowing from upper body strength as well, which doesn't help because that's why I'm losing space between him and me. I can't keep my head connected to him when I'm trying to use upper body strength to move him. So he's showing how you can knee from the like use your arms and shoulders positions, but he doesn't stay in the let's wrestle for arm position game for very long. He doesn't score there, so you kind of wrestle for position for a second to like, let's play the normal game that everyone thinks is going to keep going, and then you grab again like a bear trap into this position and just do not let go. The opponent just cannot get out of that position. So look at how my hips came in instinctively for this part of clinching, where you like try to fight for position close. Even when he's doing that, even when he's fighting for position, look at how the bend in his hips, all of that power is coming from his legs. He doesn't stand up and put his hips in almost ever.
Keep your head in, Sylvie. Keep your head in. Yeah, when you get stressed, it's like coming out of the water. You want to go.
So as you're pulling on your opponent, they start to kind of fall forward just a little bit as they're trying to keep up with you. And as they start to fall forward, when they start to kind of be behind the timing, the way that like a trailer that's hitched going around a corner for a second is a little bit behind the curve, that's when you can help them along and like pull them a little bit farther than where they can follow. And that's why I'm able to turn him, even though he is resisting me a lot with the base of his legs. I'm not using strength, it's just pulling a little bit longer as they're starting to fall that creates that. So he's making it a little bit harder for me to get into that position as he's fighting me in the shoulder and arm game. And here he's actually trying to get into those little openings that I make because I don't quite have the technique of the lockdown. But the leg strength is starting to come in more naturally. Look at how quickly he gets into that position with his head down. When you tuck your head into someone, you protect yourself to a really high degree. You can feel when you're clinching with him, you can feel the minute his head gets into the position he wants it in that you're completely screwed. Like,
yeah.
I was clinching with a kid at my gym a little while ago, and one of the trainers, anytime I got his back bent to a certain degree where he didn't have the strength to get back out, the trainer would say "Reaproe," which means like all finished, or like that's it. And he was calling out the moment that we had already gotten into a position where my clinching partner could not do anything. And that's what you feel when Tanadet puts his head under your jaw, is like, you're done. No matter how much you think you're going to stay out of trouble because he's only gotten his head in, it's already done. Like, the
femur can just kind of like bounce off, but when you're putting your head in and causing pain, they can't.
This is why he puts his head in so deeply and so fast.
What's that?
Is that a femur fighter who's trying to stay out of the clinch, they can pop your arms off easily. The arms trying to get to the neck position is secondary to the head pushing in, because the head pushing in causes pain, and so they can't really push you off as strongly. See how he's like pushing me off where my arms are trying to grab him? Once my head comes in, he can't push me off the same way. That's why you start by wrestling with your arms, but once you get your head into position, the bear trap of the arms can lock together around the neck.
But my feet are like, I'm not rhythm.
Yeah, you stop pulling this back, you pull back like this.
Sorry.
With your butt.
ต่อยพี่เจอมวยฝีมือนี่พี่ลองยากนะครับถ้าไม่เป็นเจอมวยสูงๆนะครับเดี๋ยวเขาไม่ให้ก่อน
So Tanadet, 100%, is a knee and clinch fighter. So he's talking about as you're coming in, the way that you close distance, you basically just block on your way in. Then you try to get a little bit of control of the arms so that you can get your head into position and then just snap.
แขนให้หัวโดนคางผมกดเลยครับลองกดครับ
There, that pull down, the opponent is losing position all the time. Like, they're already in a bad position, and then you start to pull, and they get in a worse position. He didn't have his head on me to show me how the long clinch without the head position is not as strong, and they can kind of like work their way into the little gaps. Here he's doing it in shadow, just how you move around and block to get into the position, but look at his overall shape and how equal the distance between his feet is all the time. It's beautiful. So he's letting me practice how to close that distance against a femur fighter who's trying to kick and keep you off. You just work your way close enough. It's okay if you get kicked, block as much as you can, but you're trying to get in. Oh man. When he goes behind his arms.
Yeah.
There. Oh, he only does it for a second, but he does it the same every time. Pause it if you can. The position his body is in, where he's completely tucked behind his arms, and the straight back down to his hips, and then the bend in his knees.
In there a little bit.
So here he's trying to move his shoulders inside my long arms, and he can't do it because of the way I've rolled my forearms inward. If you have a little bit of a gap near your own shoulders, he can roll his shoulder into that gap and get out. It's something that Karahat does, actually. He can escape really tight positions just by slithering his shoulder inward.
ตัวกันปั๊บปั๊บปั๊บได้แล้วครับปุ๊บใช่ไหมได้ครับ
So there he's showing how to grab not in the long clinch position. You grab into this position first, and then you can go into the long clinch because you have the first lock.
You can super slow down once you. Get
Once you have that
and as long as
position,
you move enough,
you
the
do
referee-
not have to rush at all.
Especially retreating.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe 5 more minutes.
ทำไมบางตัวการเราแล้วก็ตกแขนลงก็ได้นะมวยบางตัวการนะ
This was cool. So if you have people who are kind of using a longer guard to, sometimes they'll like push on your hands or they'll push on your shoulders as you're trying to come in. He swivels his arm inside their arm and then kind of parries it outward or hooks the arm.
แล้วก็ขึ้นมาล็อกเลยครับ
ใช่ไหม
ได้เรากดได้ใช่ไหมครับก็ขึ้นมาเลย
Oh.
Oh, you can feel it the second his head goes against your jaw. So what he's showing me right there with the arms out, and you kind of like,
We'll do it.
you kind of loop your hand to the inside and then continue to the outside to hook the arm. This is a really good tiny parry on your way in for opponents who have good timing with their elbows as you're trying to come in, because you're basically parrying the arm outside and controlling near their elbow as you're arm looping on your way in. They cannot elbow you while you do that.
That's when I start to lose control. Is when he's getting really close.
Okay.
So I'm not doing what he's doing where he kind of like leans his body back. Again, it's like if you were holding onto a rope or a bar and then you almost like sit down, where you like lean all of your weight backwards and create like a vector point with your hips. That's what he's doing to straighten out and pull out the length of his shoulders, which is why they can be somewhat relaxed. I don't have the position with my hips, I think because I'm doing that hunchback thing to a lesser degree. But see how my back is not flat? His back gets really flat as he leans and kind of sits back.
แล้วก็ถูเข้าไปเอาหัวถูเข้าไปนี่แหละครับ
It's like how they say sit down in your punches. He like sits down in the clinch.
ตี
I have to stand up more.
นั่งได้เปรียบ
It's weird because he's not bringing his legs together and standing up tall. He's in that bent position, but he's still very upright. Again, because he's like sitting down in the position, so he can keep the straight back and his head coming up to push underneath the jaw of his opponent. So he's standing up even though he's not like vertical.
Finish. Finish.
แต่คนละคนนี่เจ็บ
He's talking about how putting your head into the neck and the jaw like that, the pain of that allows you a much greater degree of control
เอามือครับ
than
โดนลงไป
the strength of what you might be able to do with your arms.
ปวดสูงแต่ว่าโดนลานใช่ไหม
So I'm like, your head is tall, but your body's back. See how he's like sitting? And he can go forward, backwards, sideways, anywhere.
Oh,
That
the
drag
knee
down,
bend.
my God.
The knee bend.
You have to
The
feel
knee-
it.
yeah.
It's so nasty. So see how he's trying to use his arms to find a position
Yeah,
where
very
he
nice
can
strides, Sylvie.
escape this? But there's nothing he can do as long as my head remains in
Keep going.
contact.
What are you doing? Where are you going? You're learning.
See how I was walking forward and he like caught my forward momentum with that sit down that he does to like get into a stance with
Can
his
you feel
knees
that?
really bent.
Okay.
It's like
You
automatic.
want to learn about the bag a little bit?
So I wanted to ask him how to practice any of this on the bag, because people don't always have clinch partners. And a lot of us can learn a great deal about these positions, like practice the positions on a bag.
หนีบได้หรือเปล่า
It was so hard for me to get the proximity of the upper body that he has in the clinch while creating the space between my hips and the bag. The position he gets in is exactly the position that he does in clinch, and doing it on a bag, on a static object, demonstrated to me how hard it is, the way that I'm holding, to get into that position. So see how he's using his forearms to pinch the bag? He's not hugging it, like his chest is not really against the bag. His head is against it, his chest is slightly off, but his arms are really holding the bag in place so that he can create that space between his hips and the bag so that the knees have any power at all. If you're too close to the bag with your hips, or the opponent with your hips, you don't have any power. So here he's showing how to get in.
Yeah.
So see how he's blocking, elbowing, doing little jabs, but see how his hands do not grip the bag. His hands are trained in how you use your forearms to grab and grip, because you can't use your hands to clinch.
Put your face
There's no
against
power
the
in them. There's no reason to
low.
use your hands,
Put your head down low.
as well as
Low,
having
low.
gloves on,
Yeah.
so you can't actually lock your hands into anything. So when you're playing with the bag, that's how you train your forearms to have the strength that you'll actually be using
It's getting that shape of
in real
Yeah.
clinch against an opponent. I'm smaller than
Low.
Tanadet, but not by a lot. So the difficulty I'm having with
Look
my
how low
body
his
being
head
too
is.
close is not my size. Look at that. His head is in and his whole body is off. Every single one of those knees is like 20 times more powerful than mine because of that distance he can take. And then see how he pulls his forearms forward so that his elbows are like pushing on the shoulders of the opponent so he can do these longer knees. And then he'll go back into the grip with his forearms. He transitions between the two.
Behind,
อย่างนี้ก็
yeah.
ได้ช่วงอะไร
He's saying to use the shoulders in these turns, which you can see him doing. See how his elbows are pinched in towards the center of the bag? So for the long knees, he has his forearms touching on the inside. And then when you go into the long clinch, he rolls the backs of his hands towards each other so that you're pinching almost with like the outside of your forearms. I can't get my head behind my arms the way that he does, but I can tell that that's what he's doing.
เวลาแบบเผลอนะ
And here, this is for turns, so you can like grab and lift and turn a little bit. See how wide his stance is, and his hips are
look
still
how wide
back a
his
little
legs
bit.
are.
It's like he's sitting. When you watch someone play with the bag, you can see how many hours they've put into it. He spent a lot of time doing this with the bag. See how he tackles with one shoulder up a little bit?
Yes.
He uses
Yeah.
his shoulder on impact, so like when you grab, the shoulder is pushing in. It's very much like a tackle. I felt like I had gone the wrong way on that lift, so I just tried it in the other direction. You just try different things to see what feels like that's the right way to go. Even if you don't know what you're doing, just experiment with it.
Yeah, I'm like
So my chest is against the bag, which is why I
Yeah.
can't get the
Oh,
power
very
on
good.
those knees, whereas I just need to have my forearms and my head connected and everything else is pulled.
ลงเอว
He's showing me when to use that body tackle. So again, you're kneeing and using your arms and shoulders to do like basic swimming clinch. And then as your opponent is trying to swim under, so as they move their arm under your arm to get inside position, that's when you grab the body.
เวลาคุณสู้
That's also when you can elbow. It's always taught to swim in and to swim under because that's how you get inside position. But incredibly, when you're in the process of doing it, you're very open. So the most dangerous moment in clinch is when you're swimming to the inside, even though that's totally what you need to keep doing in order to get better positions.
เวลา
ก็ต้อง
That's why timing is so
ก็
important.
ต้องเร็วเนาะใช่ครับถ้า
He's saying when you grab the body, do it fast. If you go slow, the opponent will know. Which was a criticism of how lame I was as I was trying to
You
grab
took
him.
over the fly, or
Yeah, I'm just tackling right now. Drop. Pin it down.
ใช่ครับ
When you grab an opponent around the body, if you grab too low and stay in that position, the ref will break you. If you grab low and move to a higher position, they won't break you. But if you do the entire thing fast, it doesn't matter where you grab as long as you're like grabbing the body and moving immediately. That's Nam Kabuan was known as the body throw expert, and that's what he did. He would grab and move immediately.
อันนี้กดก็ได้นะครับ
See how he's using the arm loop to pull me? He's using it as like a pressure point. And then you have to control the other arm. See how he's flipping his right arm around to try to like get out of that grip? I have one arm locked down with the arm loop. So I have to control the other arm
ถ้าเรากดได้ แต่เราก็ต้อง
with gloves on, which means you have to do it from the inside of the elbow. See how he got out of that? Because I can't quite control his arm. He's very good at flipping it around, so it's hard to grip. He's telling me it's actually easy to control that arm as long as you keep your own arm kind of as a single piece on the inside of his elbow.
สลับบ้างสลับวิ่งคิดพอบ้างต้อง
There, see how that was like, we're working on one thing, and then he reminds me about the long clinch, and you can get into it from the same positions of like, I'm either going to grab your body or I'm going to come up into the long clinch.
มีพกอย่างนี้ด้วยยังไม่แน่นครับยังไม่ได้เรายังไม่ได้นะครับ
So I did the double plum, which everyone in the West learns. He's like, this is not a good position. This is really easy to get out of. So you don't put your arms kind of in an 11 position around someone's head because it's easy to get around. So instead, you want to do a lock like this where the arm goes around the back of the neck and you're like locking someone in. It's kind of amazing that everyone learns the double plum and then you never see it
Good.
at high level fights because it's easy to get away from, even though it's a good position to try.